Hey guys, welcome back to Surplus of Suffering, where we agree that life is suffering, but our minds are powerful.
And don't let that name fool you because we're not the negative Nancy's you might be expecting. My name is Brett, and after having a degree in statistics and a stable job, my sudden battle with brain cancer brought me out of that environment and put me in a place where I wanted to spread some messages and try to reduce surpluses of suffering. And I'm here with my co host today, Sol.
I'm Sol. I'm a coach, mathematician, philosopher, psychologist, and I'm really here to ensure that everyone out there is living the happiest, most fulfilling lives that they are capable of. And that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be any suffering or conflict along the way, but that's why we're here to talk about how we can deal with that suffering, how we can deal with that conflict, and do it in the most compassionate way possible.
Yeah, that's right. Because we do believe, along the Buddhist terms, that life is suffering, but our minds are powerful. And we can use our powerful minds to reduce it where necessary. Today is episode 5, and we're calling it Passionate Communication Loving Through Conflict. This is communication is a cliche of value, but it can be sliced in all these different ways. And all the unhealthy ways to communicate and all the healthy ways to communicate and to navigate relationships through communication.
Yeah, no, I would say that communication is probably the most important thing needed for relationships. Any relationship is going to suffer without proper communication. And it is evident that that is lacking in a lot of relationships because of the high divorce rates that we've all heard about. Um, Brett, do you have like the more updated stats on that?
Yeah, everyone had that 50% number. That was kind of more of a myth. It's more around 45% in America, a little under 45%. But that's not, I think, as insightful as the next layer deeper, where people have cited the primary reason for divorce, and um, more than about 2/3 of divorcing couples cite lack of communication, growing apart, slash constant conflict as the primary reason. Which maybe those three things sound like all the reasons you would think of, but all three of those things are associated with communication, or communication could be used to prevent it or fix it. But sometimes it gets too far gone, and people have lives and they do grow apart, or they do have too much conflict to come back from.
Right. And what I've heard that's always stuck with me as a truth about relationships is that conflict is inevitable. You are two different people with two different backgrounds, two different ways of seeing the world, and you're going to butt heads at some point. But that's not what's going to make or break your relationship, that the fact that those conflicts come up, it is how you resolve these conflicts, how you deal with the fact that you're going to be wanting different things sometimes, or that you communicate in different styles, that you have different needs, different desires. How you come together is what really makes the difference. And it's what we're going to be honing in this episode, right? What is it that is bad practice and is going to make your relationship suffer? And what are the good, healthy practices? And we'll give you some uh, protocols and some practical advice for things you can start using today to bring that union and connection back into your relationships.
And I got to be honest with you, the way you just put it, it is a complicated issue. It's kind of overwhelming to try to comprehensively talk about communication, but any kind of protocol that's going to help resolve conflict, or anything that can help prevent conflicts from arising in the first place, is solidly within the SOS framework. So I was thinking maybe I was going to talk about maybe some of the good things, some of the good practices, and if that's appropriate, because I read a book called The Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. He's a clinical psychologist, and I recommend that book because it was they researched hundreds of couples and watched them for hours, and it's the closest thing to clean data on looking at relationships in many ways. This is my cat meowing to the side. Sorry. Uh, but anyway, the seven principles. I'm only talking. I want to talk about a few of them. The first one, I want your take on all three, Soul, and how what your impression is. He talks about something called enhancing love maps, and a love map being something he kind of coins, and love map being really about. It's really about the love map is where that person came from, how they became who they are, what their interests, their likes are, their inner worlds, their dreams, their fears. If you know your partner's inner worlds, then if you deepen that knowledge, then you couldn't live their life through their eyes, but you can learn and listen, and therefore show and communicate that you understand these things to your partner, and they can feel seen, they can feel heard. Um,
Hmm. Which is what we're all looking for, right? Like to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard in the relationship. That is so crucial for relationship health. And yeah, I love that pillar. You have to know your partners and know their backgrounds, because then you'll know what makes them tick. You'll know why they act the way they act. You know their background, so you understand their present circumstance.
Yeah, because as much as we're talking about communication, 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 the more you already know, the less words you have to say, or the less words they have to say to let you know over and over and over again. The more efficient you can communicate shorthand, because like you said, you know their dreams, their fears, why they might have acted weird in that one situation where everyone in the room is confused, but you actually understand why your friend or your partner is acting that way. So that pillar was interesting to me because, yeah, like I said, you can less communications required for that effective pillar.
Yeah, but it's
The
built
second one,
it's built on previous communication.
it's built on communicating beforehand. That
Hmm.
foundational. It's a foundation. I think that's why it was pillar number one, but um, it's also pillar number one for me out of the three I'm bringing up. The second one I wanted to bring up was turning towards and not away from each other. And in response to adversity, whenever a whenever a partner kind of reaches out an olive branch, tries to bid for connection, is what he says. More like whenever someone reaches out to try to establish contact and communicate. Some people, especially if you're more avoidant, you want to you want to turn away and kind of be by yourself, and you think it might feel right, but by turning away when in tough times, the some of the most effective and important communication is being missed out on. As long as you're capable of turning towards each other when adversity comes, that helps strengthen the bond, and it helps. Um, it's really important communication.
Right. Yeah, I think that something that cannot be stated enough is that we're, at least when you're in a relationship, you are a team. You should be coming at conflict with a team mindset of, okay, there is a conflict, but it's not me versus you, right? We're not here against each other, but it's us together against the discomfort or the need. That's usually where conflict comes out of, or arises from, is an unmet need that needs to get brought up. And then as a team, you can figure out how that need can be met.
Yeah, I like what you said about that, because but it's also don't want to let any negative emotions about yourself, such as shame or fear of what your partner may think if they knew the truth, be a reason for you to kind of withdraw, turn away, because you're trying to keep it to yourself. A theme we touched on in the last episode, letting others in and reaching out. If you're in a relationship and you're trying to keep secrets, that is one way. That is one reason why you might turn away, is to keep a secret from being found out. So the best way to avoid turning away from, or one of the best ways to avoid turning away from each other, is to not keep secrets.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah, no,
so
vulnerability is so crucial, because when vulnerability is gone in a relationship, then the connection goes with it.
yeah, and they call it vulnerability because it is an ability to be
Mhm.
vulnerable. So don't take that for granted. But the last pillar before we move on, I wanted to talk about, related to this book. This is still Dr. John Gottman. Is let your partner influence you. Some people, it's not hard. Some people are easily influenced, or the world around them is influencing them. But for other people, it's it's very intentional. If you might not be allowing your partner to influence you in the sense of whether, even if it's just your sense of music, your taste in music, your taste in food, or your fashion style, or TV shows, a hobby that you haven't tried that maybe they have tried. um, I find it interactive with communication. I don't know if you would agree, Soul.
Yeah, no, I think that's just like bonding. Like, sometimes when you're at a job and they do staff bonding and things like that, it's
Yeah.
like that's what in a romantic relationship you would call that, having dinner dates, or having a time where you get together and you you do something together, right? And it's going to be either something new that you both can try, or something that one person likes and the other person wants to try with them, and try to go into their world. um yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it. Because honestly, they tie it in with rituals. When you go into their world, they go into your world. There's some in between that kind of gets created, and rituals are is part of that bond. And you might have not ritual like we got, not some kind of voodoo situation. I'm just saying, like, your own unique uh, method of bonding and communication that can form when you influence each other, and the unique interactions that are created that only you and the other person hold. um, so those were the three pillars of a successful marriage that you can apply to relationships also. I could say the same thing about friendships. So it's
Mm,
not like we're talking about married people only or marriages only.
right. Yeah, I think all of the things that we're going to discuss today are going to be more geared towards like romantic relationships, but it all applies to friendships and any other kind of relationship, because in all of them you have to communicate. And in all of them there may be some kind of conflict, because same as before, we are different people with different backgrounds, with different nervous systems, and different ways of communicating, different ways of relating, and we're going to need to communicate if we want to coexist.
And communicating is, we're talking about communicating as if communication, somebody's communicating, the other one is listening or perceiving. So just as, I would debate, just as important, receiving or listening effectively. uh, the communication is just as important as a skill. Sometimes a lot of perception is assumption, and that's where people can get on different pages. That's what I like to say when communication is off between two parties. And maybe you're on page 1 or 2, and they're already on page 3 or 4, and 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 that'll lead to an argument. Maybe it ruins your night, and a surplus of suffering can be found that way too.
Yeah, I think there's such an excess in suffering in relationships when there are those miscommunications. And a lot of times, yeah, it stems from assumptions being made of what the person means when they say that. And you could say, oh, well, they didn't say it in the most tactful way, or oh, well, they're not listening intently. But what we want to emphasize is that it goes both ways, right? Whenever you're communicating, there's a person that is communicating, someone that is expressing. They're tossing an idea, a feeling, or something at you, and then there's a person that's catching it or receiving the information. And if one of them tosses it wrong, it's going to be harder for the other person to catch it, right? And if the other person isn't ready to catch it, then the communication isn't going to follow through.
Yeah, as you put it once, it takes two to tango. When you say it that way, because yeah, if you can't tango, and maybe it's hard to tango when it's the middle of the night. Maybe you're not catching that idea so easily if it's the middle of the night, and you're fed up, or you should just perceive the other one. If someone's tossing to you and it's the middle of the night and they're not really at their best or at their calmest, or maybe just the variable of time, maybe an interval of time is necessary for the important communication. So I think I wanted to tie in. Have you ever heard of catastrophizing?
Mm.
Because I've been communicating, let's say, in a fight, really, in the middle of the night, where it seems like it's all getting flushed down the drain, or it's all falling apart, and I would catastrophize that is what's happening. So I would I lose sleep over it. We both lose sleep over it, but then maybe the next day after we've cooled off, the conversation looks a lot different and there's a lot more understanding. So if you want to maximize the understanding, maximize the acceptance of each other's ideas, think about when and where you're doing it.
That's so important. And this reminds me of, one of the tools that I wanted to share, and it's the like emotional sharing protocol. It was originally we called it the anger protocol. It was a way that you can share anger with someone in a way that it would make it more likely for them to be able to receive the
Mm.
the feedback, and for you to be able to express it without blaming or criticizing, in a way that the other person can digest it without you guys getting sidetracked, because that's often what happens, right? You're trying to share one thing that's really like, I feel bad about this, but if you say it like, you made me feel like this, then it
Mm.
makes it so easy for the other person to be like, oh, I'm being attacked, I'm going to start defending, instead of trying to hear like, well, what is the feeling that's behind this complaint, but what it really is, it's not a complaint, it's you're reaching out for intimacy, you're reaching out to connect. And and I think maybe this is a good time to share that this is
Yeah.
probably one of the most valuable things that I learned from working with the child psychiatrist that I work with. And we kind of came up with this together. We workshopped it a lot. And the first step is to express your intent, to be able to say, hey, I'd like to share my feelings with you for the purpose of bringing us closer. And just by saying that, you're already establishing the tone of like, this isn't for me to put you down, for me to say that you're doing something wrong, but it's for us to come closer. And then to
It's
ask,
hard to disagree with that.
right? And then to be able to ask for permission and say, like, when is a good time for me to share this with you? Because they might not be in the place where they're ready to catch the message that you're trying to send to them. They might be super tired from work. So to give them a chance to say, this time, this date, we can talk about it then, which is also, side note, another great way for when things are getting heated, or you realize that like you're already mid conversation and you're not getting somewhere, to be able to say, hey, let's put a pause on this and let's make sure we come back to this. When can we come back after we've cooled off so we can finish this conversation? But asking for that permission, and setting a time to talk about that, having the other person agree and be ready to hear you, right? Once that is established, then you can start sharing the experience of what happened, and you're trying to
Mm.
describe the the event, right? You're not trying to project anything. You're not trying to judge anything. You're just trying to state the facts, right? This is the actions that happened, and this is how I felt, or maybe the kind of fourth step in between there is to, after you say that, is to share the story that you kind of made up, and you call it a story so that the receiver or the person that's listening realizes that this isn't something that you actually believe, but the actions or the story of whatever happened made it say so, like, hey, when this happened, this is how I felt. The story that I made up in my mind is that you actually don't care about me, right? That, or that you don't value spending time together. That's the story that I made up. And by saying it that way, you're giving them a chance to not take it as an attack, but just to say, I acknowledge that it might not be the truth of the matter, but this is how it made me feel, this is the story that's in my head, and the final step is to say, how can we make this better together? How can we come to a natural conclusion and resolution for this?
And the order is critical in that. And I think a lot of people might hear that whole protocol and say that's a lot of work or intention just behind communicating that I was upset, and or maybe perceive it like it's not worth it to take the time to do that. But I can promise you, especially people when there's sensitive individuals involved, if you take that, if you handle that conversation the wrong way, you might end up having it 4 or 5 times, with spans of time in between where you're still upset with each other. So maybe getting it right the first time with that intention, the intention that you kind of described, those steps, is worth it. It might actually save you time in the long run if you think about it. So uh, that was one reflection I had during all that, because some people emotions come and go, and they don't look that deep, because sometimes it's as deep as you want it to be. But if you're friends or partners with somebody who perceives things very deeply, then you should you should be able to peek into their world when it comes to when they're upset or when you've wronged them.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, one other thing that I wanted to stress is the importance of person that is listening just as much as like how the person that is expressing their emotions and what happened. It's important how they say it and how they frame it. I think it's even more important for the person that's listening to come at this with curiosity and empathy, and because without that, you're gonna miss the message, right? If you're not trying to figure out, well, what is it that they're feeling, what is it that they're needing, what is it that they're asking for, then they're gonna just keep coming back trying to tell you in different ways what is it that they need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you failing that, actually you might become defensive. It sounds simple when you put it in those abstract terms, but if it's somebody trying to if it's a friend or partner trying to let you know you embarrass them, or they felt like you put them down, or you put yourself in front of them and put yourself above others, it's hard to receive that information without getting defensive. We're And then you might want to play the victim, or you might want to make excuses, or find a way to get out of the blame, and it's about you all of a sudden. Versus the 4-step protocol, which Soul was talking about, is they're trying to tell you something, and if you start thinking about yourself and where you could, it can get messy quick if it's not done correctly. So once again, it takes two to tango, and it is just as hard to take in that information the best way possible as it is to hear it the best way possible, as long as you trust each other, that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've fallen victim to that, where
Yeah, me too.
I just start getting defensive. And yeah, I could say, well, you worded it in a very attacking way, and sure, maybe that's part of it, but at the same time, yeah, I wasn't there trying to listen to, well, what's behind those words, what's behind the blame. It's someone that's hurt, and is asking for my presence and my validation, right? Most people, at the very least, they want their feelings to be heard, and they want them to be validated. So anyone that is trying to listen to someone, here's a few phrases that can help you validate those things. Because for me, a lot of times, if I don't start defending, sometimes I would just shut down, because I'm like, well, I'm afraid to say anything to make things worse. But instead of that, one easy thing you can say is, well, thank you for telling me. Because just off the bat, by saying that, you're taking a little bit of pressure off, because it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable and to come out
Yeah.
and express these things. So just by saying, well, thank you for telling me, you're saying thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for taking the time to do that. I am here for you. I am listening to you. And you can, other things you could say is, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way, or it makes sense that you would feel that way, or
Yeah, those are all ways of putting yourself in their shoes, and to thank is to let them know, okay, the person I'm telling actually values what I have to say. So that definitely puts down some of the swords that might be up in that moment.
mm-hmm, yeah.
um Sorry if I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I had a couple more, like, but I think people get it, saying stuff like, I would have felt the same way, or even if you don't know what to say, you can say, I'm not sure what to say, but I do want you to know that I'm listening, and I care about this, right? I care about you and what your feelings are and what you're saying. I want to resolve this. Like, that's gonna go a long way in and of itself.
I think so too. I was just relating to you, and you're saying you've kind of fallen victim to this. I have as well, as far as getting defensive, and sometimes, especially I've noticed this especially recently, and I try not to beat myself up about it, but if someone's offering me criticism or just letting me know there's something that can be fixed, if they use a word that I think is incorrect or slightly off, or maybe, I'll call that out and say, I don't do that every time, or I wouldn't say I'm that word. Maybe I'm this, but not that. And then I'm changing the conversation, and then they don't ever. They're only on step 2 of 4 of trying to even get, and then they end up feeling not heard. And that's what I've been told. You're not hearing me, and like whether or not you heard them or not, they don't feel heard. I've kind of come to that realization. It's like, yeah, no. In my head, I'm thinking, no, I heard what she said, but if they don't feel heard, then you might as well have not.
Right.
Because I found that out too. It's like the same outcome. Whether or not I actually heard them is not as important as them feeling heard. And I think that's a good thing to think about is, does the person talking to me feel heard? Not everybody has practice thinking that,
Hmm.
especially when you have your own idea. You already have the next 5 sentences queued up. When you're talking to someone, you can tell their next sentence is going to come out no matter what you're saying. They're just waiting for you to stop talking.
Right.
Maybe I sound that way on this podcast sometimes, but I am talking to you, Soul.
I feel that. No, I feel it. I feel it. And yeah, I love that point because same here. I've been a victim to that in both aspects, right? Where in my head, I'm either kind of intellectualizing what the person is saying to me, and then I'm like, okay, I get it. I get what's going on. I have a very analytical mind, so it's easy for me to put the pieces together and be like, okay, I understand what's going on. But I'm not giving them what they need, which is maybe like that emotional, like, oh, so you're feeling like this? Like, oh man, I don't want you to feel that way. That's another one that you can say. Like, I don't want you to feel that way. Validating the emotion and you're saying, okay, I want to change that. I want to help change that. And 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 yeah, on the other side too, where the person says, "Oh yeah, I hear you." And I'm like, "I don't think you do." They're like, "No,
Yeah,
I heard everything
yeah,
you said. You said this, this, and that." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't think you understand, and I don't think anything's gonna change." And then what happens is, yeah, you keep coming back and have the same fight over and over because I'm still trying
yeah.
to communicate the same thing and trying to say it in different ways, but not getting that emotional connection that I'm looking for, that understanding.
Yeah, and you can only have that conversation so many times until the person's trying to communicate kind of decides this individual's not going to ever hear me. And maybe they start to lose faith. And, I'm kind of seeing some of that. I've experienced that. So
Yeah.
and that might be the end of a relationship that could have been saved. And it could lead to in the end. It's not like we're all, in my opinion, like some destiny is being fulfilled, and I like to have faith that there's God's plan, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But I don't want to use that kind of logic as an excuse as to not communicate and to not solve something that could be solved, just because I think I'm sticking to my values, but really you're not allowing proper communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is crucial. And at the same time, it's so important. Kind of going to a little bit of a different topic is kind of knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you need, knowing what your desires are. Because if you don't even know what you need or what you're looking for, then you won't be able to communicate that. Like you need to be able to have a little bit of introspection and understanding. And earlier you mentioned like, avoidant versus anxious attachments and, you know, realizing like where your attachment kind of stands, at least for the most part. I think it can be a fluid thing. I've found myself being um, mostly anxious, maybe, but also being avoidant at times. And there's a little bit of mix in both, but it's just kind of knowing your tendencies. And like you were saying before with a partner, being able to understand, oh, well, my partner tends to be avoidant, and I tend to be anxious. And when there is that awareness on both parties, it gets easier to know like, oh, well, this is what's happening. It's not that they don't want to do this, but this is just how they handle it. And then you can both figure out ways to mitigate those things.
Yeah, absolutely. When both people level up to that self-awareness, it really does elevate the level of communication, that compassionate communication that can be had. You're right. And I'm really happy you called it fluid, because sometimes sometimes some people felt called out when they learn about anxious attachment, or it's like, wow, it's describing me, and they feel like, oh, it's people sometimes are misled to feel doomed because well, if I'm anxious attachment and my partner is this kind of attachment, then that means it's the hardest relationship, because there are some statistics on matchup of relationships, whether it be a friendship or a relationship, being like some pairs are better off than others. And just being able to learn about yourself, and like you said, I also identify like, oh, there's some avoidant tendencies I have. So like maybe there's some situations where you tend to be avoidant, and there's some situations, maybe most of the time, you're anxious, or maybe you're neither. There's a different kind of attachment that doesn't talk about either. But
Secure attachment.
the more, knowledge is power in that way. Yeah, secure attachment, thank you. um, what did you want to move into next?
Well, since we were talking about some of those protocols, there's this mantra that I heard about in this. I think that the whole book was about compassionate communication, basically, and there were a few that I wrote down. One that was very simple. That's just a very easy way to let someone feel that you're there for them and that you care about them and you love them. And it's just as simple as saying, "I am here for you." Right? Like that is one very easy thing that you can say to someone to let them know that you love them. But one that stuck out to me the most was about asking for help. And another way to approach, these conflicts and things is to acknowledge like, well, hey, like I don't feel good right now, whether it's I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm anxious about something, I'm upset with you about something, to let this other person know, that you are suffering in some way, to say, hey, I'm suffering right now. I'm not doing okay with this or with that, and I would like your help. Just saying, you're not saying you did something, this or that. It's just I'm not doing well. I'm doing my best to figure this out with mindfulness, but I could use a friend. I could use my partner. I could use some help with this.
Yeah, asking for help in that way. Can you continue?
Yeah, there was something else I wanted to say before that had to do with the like the avoidant and the anxious attachment. It's like an example of how you can fall into this cycle, and I've been in that cycle before, where the anxious attachment is, you can also call them kind of like a pleaser, right? They're trying to please the other person. They're trying to make sure that they're saying the right things, because their biggest fear is, abandonment. So they're really anxious about that abandonment, and they're trying to do everything they can to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So, but sometimes that anxious person is unhappy about something, right? So they want to seek that connection of what they need and what they desire, but the other partner kind of misses the cues, or they sometimes they end up taking advantage of the flexibility and generosity of the anxious person that's just trying to make sure the other person is happy. And when that happens, the anxious attached person starts to feel that disconnect, and sometimes they might respond with a little bit of passive aggression or bitterness, or trying to manipulate a little bit, and then that over time it's going to build resentment. It's not going to be good. And then what might happen is that the partner will get angry and shut down, and then what happens is like, oh, okay, well, my partner's shutting down, they can't handle this. What I'm going to do is just repress this, because I don't want to be abandoned, I don't want to be a burden, so I'm just not going to bring it up.
Yeah.
But that builds up the resentment even more, and eventually you're going to want to have to get those needs met. You're going to want to bring it up, and the cycle just continues.
Yeah, there's a few different cycles. I think, yeah, you really reminded me. There's a few different cycles of that, where communication breaks down, and like you brought up people pleasers, and sometimes people, they believe they're a people pleaser, and therefore they're being nice when they don't speak up about something that might cause a conflict. But sometimes if you just bottle it up forever, and you just say yes to things you can't always say yes to, or if you just agree and support blindly, and then it actually goes against your values, it's really not kindness, it's more of a fear. that they might reject you if you don't agree or if you don't go along. And so
Mm.
that's just one example as of a way, okay, a tiny bit of resentment gets stored up, and then over time the person that you're building resentment for doesn't even realize it until you explode, and then wrong time and place. Once you explode and lose composure, when you can't hold it in anymore, that's kind of tying back into the knowledge is power. And as soon as we can become self-aware, as soon as possible, you want to be self-aware of these kinds of impulses. If you fall into the avoidant or anxious attachment um, buckets like more strongly.
And then like,
um,
mm-hmm.
well, I was just thinking of storing resentment in that book I was talking to you about, by Dr. John Gottman. There's actually, he identifies four what he calls horsemen, dark horsemen of marriages and relationships, and they're just four things that he identified through research that had very strong predictive value if they become habits to a marriage failing. Um,
Oh yeah, I've heard of
and
those.
the predictive value, I don't have the exact instance, and you've already touched on two or three of them, I think. There's out of the four. But the first horseman is what he says is criticism, when and how criticism's expressed. And you kind of touched on the healthy way, but when you attack a partner's character instead of focusing on a behavior or emotion that you felt. So when you word things like "you always do it this" versus "I felt this way when this happened." And when you say you, they're more likely to, the receiver is more likely to respond with defensiveness, and it's going to break down, and then the conversation fails there. And if that happens and never gets fixed, there's predictive value that the relationship's going to face a lot of adversity and might not be able to face. Um, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, for sure. It's and it sucks because it distracts from the actual message that is trying to be said. But as soon as I hear something that's like, well, that's not true about me, it's kind of like, well, why? Like, yeah, like, why,
Yeah.
like you said, like, why are you criticizing my character? Like, this isn't gonna be like, yeah. I immediately go into the whole also unhealthy thing to do. It's like, well, then why are you even with me if you fucking hate my character so bad? Like, which is
Yeah,
not a
and it
great
takes a lot.
response.
Yeah, you really, and I've definitely been in that position where I really hold that response in. Like I can't just say I know it's gonna escalate, it's gonna get worse. So sometimes the invisible holding in the comment is just as valuable as what you do say. But yeah, you nailed criticism there, and contempt is another one. He labels contempt as the worst one, kind of the one that involves maybe treating the partner with disrespect, kind of like using sarcasm, eye rolling, maybe mocking. This is
Mm,
something I'm guilty of. I have to say it. Like sometimes I want to express. I have some feeling of anger or frustration, and it comes out as me kind of like being sarcastic or eye rolling or just all these verbal or nonverbal ways to express my frustration that doesn't actually, I'm too afraid to say what I'm really feeling or what I'm really upset about. And then I never gave the receiver a chance to receive anything valuable other than me mocking them or me being passive aggressive. Some people just say passive aggressive instead of going any deeper, which is effectively, people have a lot of, there are people with roommates that often, there's contempt that builds, whether it's about the dishes or whatever it is, the simple responsibilities of life.
right. No, that's so true. And I think that's usually what happens when you try to, I guess, avoid those conversations. But there's still that part of you that's like, but I need to communicate this. Like, this is something that irks me, and I want to say it somehow, but I'm too scared to say it openly. And like, and it might not be just your
Yeah.
fear, but it's like a fear that, well, they might not even hear it. Like from, it could be from past experience. Like, it doesn't matter when I, even when I express it, they don't listen. So So you turn to like, well, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna say it under my breath and like, and try to get it. Like you're looking for connection. You're looking to feel heard and understood, but it's coming at it from very invalidating and unhealthy way of doing it.
Yeah, it really hits hard when you say it back to me because it's that's tough. Yeah, I need to take my own wisdom, my own words, try to, we are students. We're not perfect. We're not coming to you as the perfect communicators, the ones that never. And contempt is the most toxic one, according to the Dr. Gottman. So I really need to address that when stakes get high. But number three is defensiveness, and that being when you don't take the concerns seriously of your partner and you escape the blame in one way or
Mm,
another. You make excuses. You already touched on this when people deflect blame and basically all of these are ways in which communication never gets he laid out Soul laid out the protocol. Those protocols, the protocol breaks down in step 1, 2, or 3 when you're talking about these three. So being defensive when you're supposed to be listening or receptive, even if the communicator could have done a better job, it doesn't mean it warrants the defensiveness. You can do a good job as a receiver. The fourth one, I'd like to jump into the last one so I can stop talking, is stonewalling. Is what he calls stonewalling, and you've already talked about that too, where you withdraw when you're so overwhelmed. It could be physiologically overwhelmed. You just disengage, you shut down, um, just to make it stop, to avoid the conflict. It's something I had to break out of. I initially in my earlier years I would shut down because I thought that was the best course of action. But it is, one of the good things are the values of a good relationship. I was like turning towards each other instead of away. And this is stonewalling is one way of turning away from your partner. It's like if they want to keep talking to you and you just shut up and you go to the room and you close the door and you just ignore them, if
I,
that becomes a habit, that's the fourth horseman. So a presence of one or more of those, it's good to be aware of in a relationship or a friendship.
yeah, and that one's dangerous because silence always sends a message, and when it is silence, it's you leave it up for interpretation. The other person doesn't
Exactly.
know what's going on, and they're gonna make up some story about what's happening. But usually, what silence really means is, well, I don't want to make things worse. Slash, this is overwhelming me, and I might feel overwhelmed. I might feel a little hopeless in this, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset you even more. And I think maybe things are going to blow over if I just stay quiet, or at least, you're trying to kind of come back to your center. But that's usually what's going on. And a way that someone can respond when someone else just goes into that silence is, well, let's slow this down for a second, right? Let's take that pause. And what did you hear me say? Like, and just to invite them to
That's
be like,
kind of
yeah.
that's kind of the avenue Dr. Gottman goes. He has an antidote for each one of these, and the antidote for stonewalling is actually a structured, agreed upon, like 20 minutes of just taking a break, essentially. Maybe separating, putting yourself in a different environment, self-soothe in some way that's not toxic or self-harming or um, but like basically the advice of the agreed 20 minutes, because you said if they walk away for 20, if you stonewall somebody and then you say, okay, I'm just going to take 20 minutes, and you don't communicate it with that other person, like you said, they're going to come up, their brain's going to think about those stories, they're going to make up stories in their head. So it's important that both people take a second to pause and agree to pause. And if you can't, and hopefully during that 20 minutes you'll be able to come up with the courage, come up with the reason why you realize it's important to reconnect with that person, to settle the conflict instead of letting it fester or not resolving it.
Yeah, yeah, to regulate your nervous system. Because I've been there where I'm like, oh, wow, this is
Yeah,
so overwhelming. And I feel like I can't say anything to make this better. So I just kind of sit there waiting for like the right thought to come or the right thing to say. And it's like, oh, man. And in my head, I'm overthinking too. And I'm like, well, if I say this, it's going to get misunderstood like that. If I say this, oh, it could go bad like this. If I say this, it's going to go bad like this. So those moments of being able to say, okay, let's take a 20-minute pause, or agree on when you're gonna come back. Let the other person know why you need the break or what it is, but let them
Yeah.
know, because usually it's the avoider that needs a little bit of a pause because they've shut down, and the anxious person needs to know that it's gonna
Yeah,
get handled and it's
exactly.
not just being uh, cast away.
Exactly. Yeah, the anxious person needs to be put at bay, and then if they're self-aware of or aware of your needs, they'll give you that 20 minutes. If someone doesn't give you that 20 minutes because they're that aggressively needing, like, you really got to stand your ground. I think that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But as someone who's on the spectrum, it's it's definitely something I identify with. When you feel over, when you can't, you're talking about over intellectualizing. Like, sometimes I'll be intellectualizing in the most just insensible ways. Like, over intellectualizing implies you're making sense. Like, what if you're doing that same over intellectualizing, but you're like doing it in a set of a set of reality, or reality in your mind that's not actually true. Like,
Mm.
it's just, it's better for everyone's dignity sometimes for that 20 minutes. um, and just to quickly run by the antidote of defensiveness, Dr. Gottman says, is taking responsibility where you can, acknowledging the problem. That's, you've already kind of touched on that. The antidote of contempt is to build a culture of appreciation, show gratitude, something we've talked about. And the antidote to criticism, being a gentle startup. If criticism has to be expressed, you start with a specific need, or you just start, and if you ever have to bring up the other person's weakness when you criticize, you work up your way up to it very slowly.
Mm.
uh, Not guaranteed fixes, but good approaches, I think, especially with criticism. I'll handle a criticism a lot better if someone starts as slow as possible. Not that they have to cradle my ego. At some point it's not their responsibility to do that, but it's a courtesy. I'm a better receiver in that circumstance. So
Right. Yeah, and I love the mutual accountability, because that's really important too, especially after things do get heated, and maybe you realize, you know what, maybe I didn't say that in the most loving way, maybe I didn't receive that in the most loving way. To be able to, after you take the 20 minutes, it goes a long way to be able to say, hey, I'm sorry that I might have sounded like I was attacking, or maybe I was dismissing you and I was invalidating you. I'm sorry about that, and it's not my intention to make you feel abandoned or feel alone. And what you were saying makes sense. Something like that that acknowledges, like, okay, you know what, I may have fucked up in this moment, but I acknowledge it, and I'm gonna correct it.
yeah.
I'm gonna do it different this time.
Well, even if it's something really tiny, I've actually been in confrontations with people who are very upset, and I've diffused the situation so easily by just taking a little responsibility for something I shouldn't have done. And like, oh, I'm sorry I said that one thing, or I didn't acknowledge this other thing, or maybe even it's about body language. We haven't exactly broken down body language
Oh
and tone
yeah.
yet. And as someone who's on the spectrum, sometimes my tone is, I'm putting on a certain tone for the podcast, but sometimes my tone when I'm communicating, it's about a different thought I'm having, or sometimes it's just the opposite of what I'm trying to express, or I think I'm expressing. I'm not even aware sometimes, or I turn my whole body away, and I'm putting something in the trash can around the corner, and I'm like walking away from, and like some people, that's a huge sign of disrespect if you just walk away in the middle of a conversation, like, hello. And I would try to defend, I'd get defensive about it. And all right, so our communication already broke down because I went to go throw away a piece of trash around the corner, when really I should have, at least with the person I was interacting with, I should understand, maybe I'll wait to go throw away the thing. Like, I have the potential, as long as you know what is going to make someone feel like they're not being heard, because like we talked about, what matters is if they feel heard. Whether or not I
Mm-hmm.
heard it is not, even though I know I can listen and go throw something in the trash, they don't, it's not always as simple as I can do that and listen. It's as, can I do that, and they feel listened.
Right. And yeah, I love that. I feel like I've been there, And that ties into some people some people listen better while they're doing some kind of task. Some people listen
Yeah.
better with full eye contact. I get kind of distracted by just like staring, and like especially when it's an intense conversation, like my mind's wandering. So like if I'm doing something, it kind of helps me, and having that understanding of like, oh, my partner actually is listening when they're doing the dishes, or they're still listening when they're throwing out whatever. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying, because I've been in those moments where I feel really uncomfortable with what's being brought up. And in a way of soothing myself, I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't that big deal. I'm going to act like everything is normal just so that I feel okay. The other person
Yeah.
interprets
Yeah.
it as, oh, you don't think this is important. Like,
Yeah, trying to keep your cool, and then it's like, hello, it's like, wait, I'm trying to talk to you. You also just reminded me about a special friendship I have with a friend, Alex, from college. um he we would talk, we had nice deep conversations. We like to intellectualize and explore topics creatively even. And but the way our conversations would look, he'd come up to my room, for instance, because we were all roommates in college, and we would just pace around the room. We're both neurodivergent, but we would just pace around, kind of swaying our balances in different ways and not really looking at each other. Maybe we laugh and we'll look up for a second and just share a laugh about our something we're talking about, but we're like sharks circling in a weird way. We would just have this weird, any fly on the wall would be like, these guys are on something, because we would just, we talk for like an hour maybe, and it's just like, maybe there's a ball we're bouncing. It just, like you said, like some people do better thinking and talking and listening when they're doing something with their hands, kind of ADHD kind of vibes.
yeah, man, that brings me back to when my dad was like trying to say something really important, and giving me a message, and he was kind of angry of whatever I did, and I'd be sitting in a chair, and I'd be like swiveling back and
Yeah.
forth like this, looking down, and he was like, "Look at me in my eyes when I talk to you," and I'm like, if I do that, I
Mm,
can't process what you're saying because I'm too distracted. Like I'm doing my best to
yeah.
listen and process, and I got extra flustered that I'm like, this is how I listen, and and you're making it harder for me. But he was expecting one thing. To him, being heard meant give me your full attention. That's how I know you're
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah, I had a father figure, somewhat similar kind of vibe, and maybe it did. He firmly believed it was like a good practice to be able to stop all the moving and give full attention with eye contact, but that is too intense sometimes for some people, and it makes it harder to listen or to receive overall. But
Yeah,
as children, it's a little different because we're not expected to have all that awareness. I
right,
would hope a parent or an adult, someone in authority position would.
right. Yeah, I still remember. It's like all my focus is going into. I'm looking at his eyes. I'm looking at his eyes. I'm not moving my body. And
Yeah, you're just yeah, exactly. You're just so focusing on, yeah. It reminds me of the first episode when we were talking about saying grace. Like, okay, just saying the thing, say the thing, say the thing.
Mhm.
Whenever authenticity leaves, you bet effective communication will follow.
Right, right. Yeah, we got to be able to give people the space to express themselves the way that they want to express, and learn how it is that they express. Learn how it is that they listen, because like we were saying before, we're all different. We all have different tendencies, and just because we do something different doesn't mean that we're not actively listening or that we don't care. And sometimes that's the assumption that gets made.
Yeah, and communication, some personalities are so quick to jump. A lot of my family, or they cut each other off mid sentence, like all the time if they're having a conversation. No, it's really hard to have an effective, I say something, then you think about it, and then you say something kind of conversation when when the norm is kind of quickly taking over, and that anxious energy and defensiveness is hit instantly. I definitely suggest for those situations, for those personalities, it's a good idea to maybe think about writing down some things, maybe communicating over text, uh, to fully give the person opportunity to read everything before maybe they're halfway through your text and they're pissed, but instead of popping off and saying their own thought, they finish your text message.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can give you a fully thought out, and maybe they send a whole like a whole page of words, but it at least kind of like letter style back in the day. If you're writing a letter to your partner and they were somewhere else, you'd have to, and they annoyed you, you'd have to express it all in one letter. But
Yeah.
as long as there's a back and forth and not a somewhere in between, because if it's somewhere in between, I think that's going to get in the way too and create a surplus of suffering.
Right. Yeah, I think every dyad, every group of two people, whether it's friends, relationship, whatever, you should establish that way of communicating. How is it that we're gonna handle conflict? Like, how should we communicate and establish it? Because it's gonna be very helpful to have that common ground or understanding of like, well, this is usually how I do things. This is what works best for me. This is what you can expect. And once you've already had that conversation, it makes having conflicts not as awful and um, becoming more suffering and becoming a bigger conflict, and it can actually become just a conversation where you're practicing empathy, you're practicing your listening skills, and you realize that it's the purpose of it is for you to come closer together, right? Instead of what often happens is creates more distance.
Yeah. Uh, I've just thought about a subset of people that I really feel like we should mention.
Mm-hmm.
People who are so terrified of conflict that they will sacrifice communication.
Save peace.
Those people have challenging circumstances when it comes to relationships, unless they're really with someone who's perfect for them already. If they need to stand up for themselves, it can, it could be one partner begging the other one to speak up, to let it be known, and the fear of conflict, or the just wanting to stay away from it at all costs, creates the surplus of suffering that I'm trying to think of advice for those people, but all I can tell them about is my experience of how I became less conflict averse, and really just to express the power of the mind, because it really is kind of a choice as much as anxiety and that fear isn't doesn't feel like a choice. You know, when I got cancer, when I went through radiation, I got my whole brain radiated, and I and had some terrible, scary times. When I got out, all of a sudden, the social anxiety of walking into a full exercise class, for instance, was nothing. Like, all the things that I used to be afraid of sharing or expressing, not all of them, most of them, it was like it was revealed to me how insignificant they were compared to the actual risks of and circumstances I had been in, to where all of a sudden my communication was more open with mixed results. I will admit there are mixed results with being more open about the communication, but it opened a lot of doors as well. And the tolerance for some of that conflict is kind of like the comfort zone topic we talked about in episode 2, I believe, where if you can expand that comfort zone just little by little.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not asking people to change who they are fundamentally, but expand, see what your comfort zone could look like. Uh, be the best version of yourself, and that might involve that.
Right. Yeah, at the end of the day, communication is a skill, right? It's
Yeah, it's a
something
skill.
that we learn as kids, and we learn a lot about our communication skills and our attachment styles from our caregivers at the time. But then, later, when we become adults, it becomes our responsibility to take a look at those styles, those attachment styles, all those things, all our baggage, and say, okay, well, what do I want to keep from this? What do I want to change? But at the very least, to be aware of those things and to practice communicating them, because from there, people can see what they're dealing with, right? See what you're dealing with, and be able to listen to you with more compassion, with more understanding, and and help bring those desires that you want for the relationship into fruition.
Yeah, or maybe it'll save you time if it's never going to come to fruition.
Yeah,
You might as
that
well
too.
find out now and not 10 years later when you're out of your 20s,
That's so important
for
too.
instance.
Yeah, that's like a big surplus of suffering for the people that don't
Definitely.
communicate their desires, or they suppress their own desires for the sake of the relationship or the peace, but like it's gonna build up over time. And like how long can you act out a version of yourself that isn't authentic? Or you
Yeah, at what
just
cost?
yeah.
And so at what cost? Definitely a way to describe every trade-off. And this podcast really does revolve around a lot of trade-offs when it comes to being informed. We're trying to find all the surpluses that can be avoided, and so therefore just make a happier, healthier world. If we might have missed quite a few things, I'm sure we did, but we're open to hearing other perspectives where we missed things, where we might have been wrong.
Yeah, I definitely want to
And
hear about what people use, if they have any other tips and tricks
yeah,
for dealing with conflict. I know that there's different couples that they have their own protocol and their own little tips and tricks of how to resolve this. So I would love to hear and have more of those for all of us to be able to use and to share. Because if there is one more thing that I wanted to say before we closed off, and it's something that I learned from the Course in Miracles, and it's something that you also hear in spiritual circles, and it's that whole idea that relationships are a mirror for you, right? They get to show you who you are and how you communicate, what you think, what you feel, all these things. And at the end of the day, the purpose for these relationships, of why we come together, is for us to heal whatever is bringing us down, whatever things is holding us back from being the most authentic, freest, happiest version of ourselves. Those things are going to come up when we are with other people. And if we use those relationships wisely, we can, you know, look within and figure out what those things are, what things need to change, so that we can be the happiest that we can be.
I think that's a perfect note to end it on. I mean, imagine if both people in a relationship looked at the other as the mirror that they might need to heal. That's all we can wish for, I feel like, in a response, in a relationship. And communicating with yourself, communicating with the other on that deep level is, I hope that for everybody.
Yeah,
But with that said, I hope everybody keeps communicating, keeps being,
honest.
yeah, keep communicating, stay honest, and we'll see you next time.
Much love, everybody.